The legacy press, many in it, love to provide partial data and out-of-context statistics to push the anti-gun agenda, and it is many people with membership and everybody else's job to correct them. 2 bits of false or misleading information pushed around today. A new resource from the Center for Homeland Defense and Security at the Naval Postgraduate School, dubbed the K-12 School Shooting Database. So what it's called. This is a database that purports to provide the most accurate information on the number of school shootings in America and was conveniently released just before the midterm elections. Now, according to the database, there have been 1,300 school shootings since 1970. Does this seem like a lot? Maybe perhaps more than is likely? Well, you're right to be suspicious because the number includes not only school shootings, which you would think is a fairly specific thing, but it also includes every single instance that a firearm has even been brandished, simply presented on school grounds, regardless if the trigger was ever squeezed. It also includes a bullet that may have come from elsewhere, but hit the school property, regardless whether there are victims or intent or even people present when said bullet hit the property of the school. So as far as I can tell, an accidental discharge of a musket by the Civil War reenactment team would count as a school shooting, which seems just a little bit off. But that's not the only misleading information that we'll cover with our next guest, John Lott, the president of the Crime Prevention Research Center. The current talking point by many in media, like Don Lemon and others, is that the white right-wing men are the most frequent perpetrators of mass shootings, which John says is baloney, since few public killers have obvious political or religious reasons for their attacks. It seems that the common denominator is usually mental illness. John joins us now to discuss these stories. John, as always, good to see you. I want to go to the first, where this school shooting database, I'm always suspicious when I see things like this that are put together, but to see how far this definition has been stretched to include things that absolutely under no circumstances would count as a school shooting, I'm assuming that people are awful enough that they would inflate something horrific, the numbers of something horrific, as a fear-mongering tactic. I mean, that's just me making an assumption. Is that kind of what you get out of this as well? Because I can't imagine, just some of the examples that I've listed and you've discussed too, to have some of those included as a school shooting, that's not what a school shooting is. And I feel like they're trying to prey on the fear of parents to get them to act in ways that are contrary to keep their families safe.
Sure. We've talked about this before with Everytown and other groups. There's really no difference in terms of the errors here. The Crime Prevention Research Center, we collect this type of data. There's even an acknowledgement in the Naval Postgraduate School that they're not even sure about many of these cases. When we went through this, when they came out, it looks like about half of their cases aren't real shooting events at all. But even the ones that are include things like an accidental discharge by a law enforcement officer, or include a robbery that occurred on school property. It could have even been after school hours, or a gang fight, or something like that that may occur late at night that is in no way involves anybody connected with the school. So, but as I say, about half these cases I don't even believe exist. They rely on kind of initial reports that you could find in newspapers, and those often can be very inaccurate. You have to go and follow these things up, and so I really don't see much point in talking about it because it's not serious.
No, it's not, and I remember Everytown's list when they previously had said this. There was at one point a couple of instances that were on their previous list wherein there was a drug deal that had gone bad and it was a block over, but
they
because
included,
it was by the school,
Well, they include things like a self-defense of a gun as a school shooting, or they would, as you say, include shootings that didn't even occur on school property. So, I don't see much point talking about it. We've been through this before. I don't know what to say.
Well, they're going to keep coming out with the
No,
list.
I know, I realize that.
They think if they say it enough that people will start to believe it.
Sure, no, I'm sure you're right, but
I do want to move on to the other topic though that you have taken exception with, and I was pretty floored when I heard Don Lemon say this on CNN the night before and then double down on it last night. This idea that all of the mass murdering monsters, John, ever in the United States history are all crazy white men, probably Republicans. Who knows if they're NRA members, but they're dangerous. So I don't know what his suggestion was that we do about it, but that seemed a pretty broad claim to make.
Right. And of course, he prefaced that by saying, we shouldn't use inflammatory language. But look, we went through this. As you know, we collect data on mass public shootings. We collect data on terrorist attacks with vehicles or bombings. We collect it not only for the United States, but for the whole world. In the United States, you just don't find political or religious motivations playing a role in the vast majority of these cases. About 70% of the mass public shootings over the last 20 years have nothing to do with either religion or politics. They're people who want to commit suicide, but they want to commit suicide in a way that's going to go and get the media attention. And they know that the more people they kill, the more media attention that they're going to get. If you look at the breakdown, you find about 3% of the mass public shooters are identified in the media as either conservative or Republican, and the exact same 3% are identified as either Democrats or liberals. The largest group that you can find any identification with is 10% of the mass public shooters are identified as Muslim extremists. So that's by far the largest group. And if you look at bombings and vehicle attacks, there haven't been too many large vehicle attacks, but what you've seen happen has basically been like the Muslim in New York City last year, which drove a truck and killed 8 people and wounded 8 others. You have really no bombing attacks that have killed 4 or more people in the United States as compared to most other countries. The one thing I'll say is, the one big difference, the United States has relatively few mass public shootings compared to the rate in the rest of the world. There is one big difference between our attacks and the rest of the world, and that is in our attacks, as I say, they're not religiously or politically motivated by and large, but in the vast majority of the rest of the world, it's overwhelmingly Muslim. So you look at the 25 worst mass shootings, ignoring guerrilla or types of attacks or government attacks. You're talking about 23 of the 25 worst were committed by Muslims, for example.
So Don Lemon's wrong, and I think that you just...
Well, I'm sure you're not shocked.
Shut them down, John.
I'm sure you're not shocked. So, unfortunately, this type of language talking about the increased rate of right-wing shootings and things like that. I think partly the reason why it's getting so much attention this last week is the media wants to push back against President Trump's comment about jobs, not mobs. They want to try to say this is not just a Democratic problem. So kind of the shooting at a Republican office in Florida or the burning of a Republican office in Wyoming or other places get pushed out of the news, and they talk about this. And it's just sad because
it was a successful talking point, and they're trying to refute that by really focusing on and trying to make it about politics and make this to say, look at the right. The right's worse.
Yeah, well, I don't think it's close in terms of non-kind of terrorist type things. In terms of mass killings. You don't see Republicans generally going and haranguing people at restaurants and things like that when they go out. But look,
or opening fire on them at a ball field while screaming about health care as the one. Now that one was politically motivated. The shooting of congressional members on the ball field.
Fortunately, nobody was killed.
It's still in the minority.
Right. Well, fortunately, nobody was killed there except for the shooter. But, I'm not saying there aren't any cases where there's politically motivated shootings. I'm just saying it's a very tiny percentage in the United States. And, it's just another way to try to drive a wedge between people and try to get people inflamed. And I'm sure the media wants to do this in part before the election comes up.
There you go. John Lott, Crime Prevention Research Center. Always so good to have you on, John. Thank you for, again, your expertise, your commitment to the cause. Good to talk with you.
I just want to get accurate information out. That's the cause. Thanks.
We appreciate it. Thanks, John.
More clear.
Thanks.
Virtue signaling and corporate gun control go hand in hand, but earlier this year when a lot of